At the heart of the Muslim world lies a city which symbolizes Islam, Mecca. It was from here that the sacred message of the Prophet Muhammad was issued, and it is to Mecca that pilgrims come from all over the world to renew their faith at the very source of the Muslim religion. And it is from here that we begin our journey of exploration of the world of Islam. Pilgrimage is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, the principles which constitute the faith of the Muslim world. The pillars are the declaration of faith, or shahada, there is no divinity but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. Prayer, which all true believers must observe 5 times a day. Fasting, which enables man to look inwards on himself. The giving of alms. And pilgrimage. All Muslims must make the journey to Mecca at least once in a lifetime. The heart of Mecca is the Kaaba, a temple since the time of Abraham, which Muhammad cleansed of its idols to make it the sacred sanctuary of Islam. From the 7th to the 17th centuries, the Islamic faith spread across the whole civilized world, taking in its stride Arabia and the old Greek Empire, North Africa, and Spain. Today, it covers half the African continent, the Middle East, 5 Soviet socialist republics, all India, a third of China, and reaches as far as Indonesia and Malaysia in the Far East. It is still growing in Africa and, in most recent years, in Europe and the United States. From Yemen to Istanbul, from Fez to Lahore, one sees the same symbols of the faith. The circular dome which covers man's land, and the arrow which points upwards towards the heavens and which calls him to prayer. Symbols which are known and recognized the world over, the mosque and the minaret. Islam puts aside differences of race, language, and culture, uniting Islamic nations under a single faith and the governing law of the Prophet. God says in the Quran, "You are the most excellent people ever to rise from mankind." The Quran also says, "He makes his signs clear to you that you may have a guide, so that you may be people who call others to good, ordering good acts. Those men who act in this way will be happy." In the beginning was the desert sand and wind, arid Arabia furrowed by caravan routes and the tracks of men forever in search of fertile ground and a vital but rare water supply. And where these were found, the first settlements began. And it was in those areas where towns evolved and a human society was founded. The ancients called these fertile areas of Arabia Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia. At that time, the small town of Makkah, the Mecca of today, in the heart of Arabia, was dominated by a merchant aristocracy. Mecca's international trade placed it at the center of a communications network where the Mediterranean, North Africa, and Asia met together. The religious faiths of the Middle East were torn by fierce infighting. The inhabitants of Mecca were more concerned with money than with religion, and the memory of the God of the Bible and his prophets faded. But the God of Abraham was destined to be worshipped once more. In 570 AD, a child called Muhammad, meaning deserving of praise, was born in Mecca. His parents died in his infancy, and he was brought up by his grandfather and by his uncle. From his early days, Muhammad would retreat into the desert to fast and purify his soul and body for prayer. And it was there that the message of God was revealed to him, the divine word he was to transmit to all mankind. He married a wealthy widow who bore him 2 sons and 2 daughters and gave him the confidence, faith, and support he needed. When he was about 40 years old, he began to preach his faith in a single universal God to Mecca. Fighting the idolatry and corruption which reigned in Mecca, his impassioned faith gained him a few disciples. He soon became a threat to the established power, was persecuted, and was forced into exile. In 622, Muhammad and his disciples left Mecca for Medina. This was known as the Hijra, the emigration, the breaking of ties, the date on which the Islamic era was established. Summoned to Medina to mediate between 2 opposing clans whose quarrels were destroying the town, Muhammad was able to use his political ideals and understanding of man in the community. Islam, which means giving the self to God, rests on the idea of a total faith, a faith which would become the unifying principle of Arab society. There is one God, the God of the Bible, benevolent and merciful. Man is responsible to God and will be judged at the resurrection. The fundamental task of Islam was to gather together men equal before God. At Medina, Muhammad decreed the rules of the faith. the social principles and moral precepts of Islam. The Quran, the divine truth revealed to man, the sacred book whose original, according to Muslim belief, is in heaven, was to ensure the survival of the message. Islam would spread to the furthest corners of the globe. By the neighing of the horses in battle, by those who go in front and run, by those who are swift and fly, and those who lead the struggle. These words from the Quran urged on the cavalcades of the Knights of Arabia as they set out to conquer the world and spread the Islamic faith. This idea of a holy war does not figure among the 5 pillars of Islam. The word jihad, translated as holy war, originally meant any great effort, and the 2 different meanings contained within it were distinguished by the Prophet when he said, "We have returned from the little holy war against the outside enemy, but now we must embark on the major holy war. That is, a war carried on silently against the infidel, which each of us carries within himself." The connection between these 2 meanings, the 2 elements of jihad, is still clearly to be seen today amongst the fighters in this Afghan camp. The use of weapons is associated with the teaching of the moral principles of the Quran and a cultural affirmation. Muhammad emphasized the responsibility and freedom of every man. Islam is a call to God, but man is free to refuse. Yet to refuse God and the Quran is to condemn oneself to evil and place oneself on the fringe of the community. The basic freedom of the individual is relative because it is linked to a social group and limited by it. The people take precedence over the individual, and God rules each and every one. The strength of Islamic spirituality springs from this balance between the individual and the whole. The Quran affirms the fundamental equality of all men before a God whose political and religious law is absolute. There are no clergy as such, but legislation is in the hands of men who are both judges and priests. This law, if the need arises, will be defended with arms. Thus, in Afghanistan, the religious fighters are violently rejecting Marxist materialism. A witness to the oneness of God, the declaration of faith, the Shahada, is also an expression of the divine mystery. The Shahada is a negative formula in itself, in that it names God without defining him. For it emphasizes the impossibility of language or human reason to grasp the concept. It is also a universal formula, proclaiming the belief of each and every person in one inexpressible God. The Muslim must pray 5 times a day, more than in any other religion. Before he kneels to pray, the believer must face in the direction of Mecca. Then he outlines the shape of a mosque in the sand, thereby creating a sense of the absolute around him, as there is within him. If there is no water, he uses sand for his ritual ablutions. The raised finger, which signifies unity, is a testimony to the oneness of God. Prayer begins at earliest infancy. It is a ritual which continues to be practiced despite the demands of an industrialized society. The prayer mat is the symbol of the mosque, which literally means the place where a man prostrates himself in prayer. Whatever his age or circumstances, the believer isolates himself and closes out the world in order to open himself to God. Even on the open sea, the crew of this fishing boat observe the ritual of prayer. The mosque stands at the center of the town. It is the very heart of community life. Every Friday, the men of the town gather to pray. At the call of the muezzin, the whole town stands immobile, and in this way the community asserts its unity. The Babshani Mosque in Lahore is probably the largest in the Muslim world. The mosque is open to the sky and is accessible to the outside world. Daily life and prayer form the single unity of Islam. It is the community who build the mosque. The mosque is not just a group of symbols and signs, nor is it mere stones. It is, above all, the people who use it. Prayer is preceded by ritual ablution. The water is symbolic of baptism, not sacramental as in the Christian religion, but as a necessary and symbolic purification of the body before addressing oneself to God. By performing this rite, the believer moves from one world into another.
Allahu Akbar.
In a school in Abu Dhabi, the children of Bangladeshi immigrants are initiated into the different phases of prayer. At dawn, midday, afternoon, dusk and night. These are the same gestures that they will repeat all their lives, over and over again, every day. Interspersed with passages from the Quran or ritual invocations, the gestures are made up of many symbolic movements.
না শুনো আগে হাত দাও এই দুইটা হাত দাও হাত দাও তারপর নাক লাগাও নাক নাক আগে লাগাও হ্যাঁ এটা একটু আলগা রাখতে হবে এটা তুমি দেখি দাও দেখি না এটা একটু আলগা রাখো আল্লাহু আকবার.
Standing up with his left hand and his right, the believer lowers his eyes as a sign of humility and recites the first surah or verse of the Quran.
আল্লাহু আকবার এইভাবে এইভাবে আল্লাহু আকবার.
Then he bends down, hands on knees, and straightens up again to thank Allah for hearing his prayer.
Allahu liman hamida. Allahu akbar.
After this, he prostrates himself as a sign of submission.
Allahu akbar. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Finally, in a soft voice, He murmurs the last prayer and turns his head to right and left to greet the faithful of the whole world. Muhammad attempted to curb the social inequalities existing in the very poor countries of his time. The politics of Islam are egalitarian, and its two pillars, fasting and legal almsgiving, are intended to put the principle of equality among all men into practice.